pretty much every single queer parent I have ever spoken to knows about Mombian.com, and that is run by Dana Rudolph. Today, I have the opportunity to speak with both Dana and her wife, not just about the family that they've created and their lives together over 30 years, but also about the creation and growth of Mombian.com. It is truly a remarkable resource, and I know you're going to absolutely love every single second of this conversation. Welcome to the Becoming Baby Ready podcast, your podcast for queer family planning. My name is Sam, and throughout this podcast, you'll hear me have conversations with professionals who work alongside people who want to start and grow their families, as well as parents of intentionally created families. Everyone I speak to identifies as being part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. This is your opportunity to learn answers to questions you didn't even know you had. Welcome, everyone. Today, I am excited to be sitting chatting with Dana and Helen, and I'm just going to let you two jump right in, tell us who you are and about the members of your family and all the things.
Well, I'm Dana Rudolph. I am the founder and publisher of Mombian, which is a blog and website for lesbian moms and other LGBTQ parents that I founded back in 2005. But I founded it because I'm a parent and we are parents ourselves. And back then, I was looking for resources for us as we went about our own family journey. And my background had been in internet services and marketing. And so doing something in the blogosphere, which was just starting to hit people's radars then, just made a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So.
Absolutely.
I'm Helen. I'm the other half of Dana. This partnership. We've been together 31 years now.
Wow.
Going on 32, yeah.
Going on 32. I'm just not count our chickens before we get there, but
got a couple more months.
Pretty good. Yeah. We met in grad school, and we've been together ever since.
Yeah. Excellent. And your parents?
We are parents. We have one son who is now in college, which is pretty unbelievable.
And finishing up college.
And not that he would get to college, but that he's like that old,
Right? That we look back on our lives and we feel like we're still 31, and how do we possibly have a child that's finishing up college, right?
Yeah. So Helen mentioned that we met in graduate school. I think particularly for me, when we first met, having kids wasn't really on my radar. I was busy in the middle of a career change, and I think it took me just a little bit longer to feel settled in my own life. And I wasn't against kids per se, but it was just not there on the priority list for me for a number of years. I guess we were together for about 10 years before we even started talking about it.
I'm a little bit older, about 5 years older than Dana, and I wanted to have kids. It had always just been I don't know. Everyone has kids, right? It's just an assumption sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to think of, on my deathbed, what would I look back and wish that I had done? Job, check. That's pretty good. Family, great partner, check. But raising a child and seeing that process, that growth process, how do humans evolve, not evolve over time, but how do they grow up?
Yeah.
And I just thought that was a really important thing to do. And so I started talking to Dana. She's like, no, that's not what are you talking about? We never talked about this. No.
Right.
We'd been together about 10 years at that point. So it took a little time.
Yeah. And I'll tell you a couple of the things that shifted it for me. Mm-hmm. One was seeing your brother have a kid and just like being up close and personal with an infant and thinking, oh, this is kind of cool and not so bad.
Because we didn't have any contact with children at that point.
Sure.
We were both very busy in the career world.
Yeah. I mean, I had a younger brother. My brother's 5 years younger, so I did get to see him as an infant and kind of interact with him in that way. So I wasn't like totally against kids, but and then 9/11 happened, and I was working in the financial services industry at the time. I was in an office that was at the World Financial Center, which was right next to World Trade in New York City. And I would commute every morning on the train into the World Trade Center Path Station at about 8:45 in the morning. And then I would
Oh,
walk up, there was like an underground tunnel up into the building where I worked. Now, I started a new job, same company, but in their New Jersey office the Monday before the Tuesday of 9/11.
wow.
And so I was pulling into a parking lot in Jersey instead of being there in the train. I had colleagues and former classmates who lost their lives or lost spouses,
Mhm.
which was just awful. But for me, it really, I don't know, it drove home that kind of the sense of carpe diem and
Yeah.
what we miss as life flies by. And I was just like, as Helen said, what are you going to regret not doing? And
Hmm.
that kind of elevated the kid thing for me. So we
Yeah.
started talking about it.
Yeah.
And gosh, it was almost right away, I think, that I had the idea of doing reciprocal IVF, which we didn't even have a name for at the time. I
I
was
was
just
gonna
like,
say.
hey, let's use my egg and you
She's like,
can.
yes, this complicated thing, but it ends up with a child. I said, yes, I'm in.
That's right. She mentioned baby in
Whatever.
there. I'm jumping in when she says baby.
And
Yeah.
Helen wanted to experience carrying a child,
Yes.
and I was kind of ambivalent. I'm a much smaller person, so I was like, it'll suit you better, You'll have like more room in there for
There's
the
plenty of
kid.
room here. Yeah, that's true. So Dana donated the egg, sperm from a sperm bank to create the embryo that I carried. So I was the gestational mom. I got to, get pregnant and carry the baby and give birth. And then, this first 6 months, you're very attached to this baby, feeding it
Yeah.
all the time and stuff.
Hmm.
And I love that part of it. And the initial plan was the plan was I would be staying home with the child. Plans don't always work out that way.
Right. Hmm.
Yeah, so I guess just one other factor in terms of
Maybe I'm going too fast.
that's fine.
Explain things. Yeah.
One other factor was that because I was younger, it was better to use the younger eggs. That
Sure.
usually works out
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
So
Freshness, expiration
fresh
date a
eggs.
little bit
That's
longer. Yeah.
right.
And we were just at the beginning of the sperm banks letting us
Oh
search
yeah.
online.
Yeah.
It used to be they
Yeah.
would like ship you paper
Oh, we got paper
documents
every
about all
month.
the
This big thick stack of
yeah.
paper you go
Hmm.
through.
But
Yeah.
we were just able to start looking online, and but then we would like print out many of the
Yeah.
profiles, as I remember. And at one point there were so many of them, I was like, let's just put them on the floor and we'll take the one that the cat sits on, which is
Right.
not
Which is not what we finally
what we
did,
did.
but
Okay. Okay.
that was the
Okay.
proposal. Yeah.
Um, mostly we wanted someone with a good but not perfect medical record. We thought if it was perfect, he probably didn't know what
Mm.
was
There
happening.
were a surprising
So
lot that had absolutely nothing wrong with them. I'm like, nobody is that. Yeah.
Right.
Actually, we ended up with a Canadian, actually. Now that I
oh,
think
that's
about
true.
it. Yeah,
That's
there you
true.
go.
See the Canadian connection.
Absolutely. A little maple syrup in the veins there.
There
Yeah.
you go. There
Yeah.
you
But
go.
it was our we had to try twice.
Yeah.
We did try once, and
Didn't
it
take.
was it was chemical pregnancy and
Yeah.
then not. So
Yep.
Wow. So that's a lot of change in a short period of time, really. But I think that you had I think about what you're saying about 9/11 sort of motivating you to, okay, so what is this next step in my life and what steps am I going to take? And I think of it from a different perspective because I had a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old at the time. And I watched, somebody called me in the morning and said, have you turned on the TV? And I said, no. And they said, do it, and then sat there in tears thinking, what have I done? I've brought a baby into this, I've
Mm.
brought babies into this world. So
Mm.
because I was looking at it retrospectively, but I can, hearing your perspective, it's actually, it's refreshing to think that that positive inspiration came for you out of something so horrific. I want to look back on my life and see that this is something that I have created and it's something to look forward to.
and I think it was also kind of a sign for me that there was still hope in the world.
Yes.
You know, if we stopped having kids or doing anything because of all this fear, then those who are causing the fear have won, you know?
It's true. And it's kind of where
So,
we are now, right?
yeah,
Different group making us
sure.
feel that way, but it's no less the fear that do we give in to that fear, or do we let ourselves have hope and make ourselves push forward so that we do have a voice, we do have that opportunity. It's interesting, and I love learning a different perspective and a different thought process. And truthfully, most of the people that I speak to on this show have children that are much younger, so they are that much further removed from that period of time in history. They remember where they were at the time. My children don't remember where they were, but they were a pivotal part of my thought process at the time. So it was just an interesting take, and I wanted to highlight that because it gives it, like I say, a positive spin that I hadn't necessarily let myself think about at the time.
Sure. I mean, we were early, but not pioneers by any means. You know, the real baby boom was, late 70s into the 80s, I think.
Yeah.
Those were the people who were, you know, mimeographing instruction sheets on how to do your own insemination and mailing them around, and
That's
bless
right.
them for all of their leadership. We had a little more behind us than that. We were living in New Jersey at the time, which was, I think, fairly inclusive. It was pre-marriage equality, obviously, but we didn't, we experienced a lot of kind of inadvertent exclusion rather than active prejudice, I think.
Right. Yeah.
But uh, but overall, it was a pretty good process. Our physicians were welcoming. We found an inclusive fertility clinic, and there was even a group they started for queer moms that we went to. I guess it was
After?
after.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that was afterwards.
I think we all just had little babies at that point.
I think it was when you were pregnant.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah,
Yep.
because I remember, that you go through the whole fertility process, and for doing the reciprocal IVF, it meant like injections for both of us and blood monitoring. And we were at the clinic for blood monitoring like every morning for several weeks in a row, both of us. Um, so, there was just like this intense focus on it. And then you get pregnant and they're like, okay, see you in a month. And you're like, but wait, I
I'm
need
not
to know what's
ready.
happening. So we'd go in for the group, the support meetings with the other queer moms, and we'd be like, can we sneak into the back and fire up the ultrasound?
Yeah. That makes sense.
Which we didn't do.
Not that we're telling anybody, no. But it's true. You do go from being sort of handheld all the way along to being sort of pushed out the door and saying, okay, get yourself to school kind of thing on your own. It can feel kind of, oh, I'm sure, very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Did they call it reciprocal IVF when you did it, or was that just, yeah?
No.
Because I feel like that's a fairly new term. I mean, in the last 10 years term.
I think the term is new, and I've actually tried to track down myself how early reciprocal IVF goes, and I'd have to look it up, but I think I've seen a reference to it in the early 90s. So we were hardly pioneers, but again, it wasn't very common. It takes a lot of extra steps. We were also lucky enough that my employer paid for it, which is not
Wow.
always the case.
Yeah.
So,
Actually, both rounds.
yeah.
I think only because you were so insistent. You were wonderful. Yeah.
Hey,
So you
but
can't
that's
tell
what
by our
happens.
height difference, but she's like kind of tiny. But there was this little bulldog that went into the HR department and
Yeah.
basically insisted that if you're giving this to the straight women, you're going to give it to us too.
Fair.
And that was the end of that. They did. They
Yeah.
took their marching orders. I loved it.
I think it was more because, we've never handled this before, and it sounds like there could be some human resources
Right.
issue with it.
Right.
So we're just gonna cover
Exactly. I think that's what
first.
happened. Yeah.
Hey, listen, if that's what it takes, that's amazing because you're right. Many companies still offer rights to the straight people wanting to have babies and needing fertility assistance, and just absolutely don't. And what I'm seeing a shift in is, yes, they will start to offer some support for lesbians or people with uteruses who want to carry a child or have a baby. But as soon as you have a dynamic where there's a parent or two parents who don't have a uterus who want to have a baby, then there's no resources available for them to hire a surrogate or pay for IVF or egg retrieval rather for someone. So it's shifting, but I mean, I feel like you kind of squeaked in under the wire where companies were like, nope, we're shutting the door on all of it. And then they've just slowly started to open the door a little bit again.
I think it was definitely the kind of lack of policy
Yeah.
that perhaps let us slip in, because then what happened was a lot of companies would offer it, but would require medical diagnoses of infertility.
Mm-hmm.
And for many same-sex couples, it was simply the fact of being a same-sex couple
Yeah.
that drove our need for it, rather than any kind of inherent infertility per se.
Right.
So yeah, I think being early on kind of helped us in that respect. Although then we went through a whole bunch of legal gymnastics to get our parenthood, which I can talk about.
That was going to be my next question. Then how did all of that play out?
So we weren't married.
Well, it couldn't be.
We couldn't be married.
Wasn't an option at the time.
But I was darned if I would have to adopt my own genetic child. Right. Legally in New Jersey, because of a very famous earlier case called the babyM case involving a surrogate, Helen would have been the legal parent and I would not.
Right.
So we went to an LGBTQ focused lawyer who had experience with this sort of thing. And we said, we know we need to do something so that we are both legal, but I don't want it to be an adoption, because that's humiliating to adopt my own child and to go through the home study and all the invasive questions. So he said, this has not been done before in this state, but why not try and create some precedent? And I'm going to petition the court for a pre-birth parentage order.
Okay.
That would allow you to be named as a parent. Now, not only would that avoid all of the home study and everything, but it would be active from the moment the kid is born. Because with an adoption, you can't start the process until the kid is born, and then it takes several months.
Right.
So there's that period in between where something can happen to Helen.
Things can happen, right?
Sure,
it's a critical
100%.
period.
And something did, which is another thing we could talk about.
Yeah.
During the birth. So we petitioned the court. We thought we'd be the first in the state, but there was actually a couple in the next county that was doing it with a different lawyer. They were actually first by a couple of months. So that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
We were part of a trend, clearly.
Sure.
And we got the parentage order.
Yeah.
So
and the hospital was cooperative. And so from the moment he was born, he was ours collectively. So Dana was mentioning this, but I had like the world's most boring pregnancy ever. I never had morning sickness, other than getting really, really big like everyone does. I had no interesting, great pregnancy stories until the final moments. So during delivery, stuff happened, and I ended up having an emergency C-section. Okay. So it was a little tense there for a little bit, and everything went fine, thankfully. He's great. I came out great. But something might have happened in that period. He would have lost he would not have had parents
right.
if we didn't have the parentage order. So
and what would have happened? I mean, overwhelmingly grateful, but that didn't happen. But if you didn't have the pre-birth order, then what would have happened if something had been catastrophic?
Well, I think there were probably steps we could have taken pre-birth for Helen to name me guardian or something, but that might have also taken time to then kick into action. Honestly, we didn't go down that route, so I'm not sure about what the specifics would have been.
Yeah.
But it would have been unclear.
Yeah.
And it's not what you want to deal with, in the hospital when I'm being whisked down the hallway into an emergency situation.
Yeah.
But you also weren't married. And so how does
Right.
how does that unfold in terms of if something had happened, Helen, baby was fine, but something had happened to you, and even if you come out of it just fine on the other side, but weren't capable of making medical decisions for yourself through that process, was that a time where you would have been allowed, Dana, to speak on her behalf if you weren't legally married?
We did have wills, and we had
medical
Powers
power
of
of
medical
attorneys
powers of
for each
attorneys,
other.
you know,
So
for each other.
Okay.
yeah,
So I think that would have been covered.
yeah. But we certainly could have been questioned more because it wasn't as
Yeah.
common or known, and they might have
Sure.
needed to see the paperwork and
Sure.
show it
Have
to their
some lawyers.
supervisor, all this kind of thing.
Yeah. It,
So
it's just, I think it's just a reminder, especially in light of the times we're living in, where it feels like we are rolling backwards so far and so fast, really how far we have come, that you have the ability to both be your child's parents, that you would have been able to be respected as, but now we can get married, and so there's not a need to, I mean, it's probably still a good idea, yes, to have wills and to have powers of attorney. I'm not suggesting that it's not, but just that assumption that comes with being able to be married, if that's the decision you make, so that's just a given that your spouse is your deciding path.
yeah, but I don't know how it works in Canada, but in the US, queer couples are still advised to get either a co-parent adoption or a court
Yeah.
order of parentage, even if they're married and both their names on the kid's birth certificate, because there should be the presumption called the marital presumption of paternity of
Parentage.
parentage, that says any child born in a marriage is the legal child of both spouses. That's been challenged for same-sex couples to various degrees of success in certain states. But getting an adoption or a court order of parentage should be legally binding across all states at any time. So
Yeah.
that's still considered a thing to do, because a birth certificate doesn't like create the legal parentage, it just records the parentage that was legally created somewhere else.
Right.
So the birth certificate alone is unfortunately not enough to secure it.
But then what's the point? I mean,
Yeah.
I could
What
go
is
down a whole rabbit hole. I mean, here at this time, I can only say at this time, birth certificate is enough to determine parentage in Canada. We have our own individual who would like to become the prime minister of this country, who would more than happily eradicate a lot of the laws that have been well established here. So would that change? Should that individual become prime minister? I don't know. I truly don't know. Some of the statements being made are truly frightening. So I I don't know. It's but it shouldn't have to be that if you two consent to being this child's parents, you shouldn't have to go in front of anybody else to say, we are this child's parents. Do you
And
agree?
yeah, and there are a growing number of states that are recognizing that, family law is largely a state by state matter here.
Yes.
And several states, including Massachusetts, where we live now, have enacted some revisions to their parentage laws that take into account all the different family forms today. So there's, gosh, maybe 10 or 12 states that have, fairly good and updated laws in that respect. But that's still only a fraction of the 50. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and when we talk about these, have these sessions where we revisit the ancient history of our family formation, I too am stunned how far we've come along. I mean, when we got together, I never thought we could get married, or
Right.
kids that weren't really a thought at the time, and yet here we are a bunch of years later, and we have all these wonderful things, not given to us, granted to us, but my point, what I'm trying to get to, is we shouldn't take it for granted.
Right.
And I think it's, times like now where the pendulum's swinging very strongly in the opposite direction, that we just really need to kind of protect what we have,
Yeah.
and just, work with everybody, those on our sides and the other side,
Yeah.
to try to just, can't we all just get along? What's in
Right.
the best interest of the kids? To me, that's what should matter.
Right.
I mean, there's lots of parenting stuff that happens with straight families that it just drives me nuts. I mean,
Yes.
they want to point fingers at us. There's no unwanted children in gay marriages. I'm telling you.
And there's that. That's
Straight families should be a little
yeah.
more careful about, all the children.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it should be as caring. I think the gay kids of gay families are probably a lot better off. We will rule the world one day.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. But it is true. Our families are intentionally created. They don't
Yeah.
happen by accident. They don't happen without a lot of emotional and financial resources sort
Yeah.
of
Right.
put
Yeah.
together
Yeah.
to be able
I
to
mean,
make it happen.
sure, I have to put in a small caveat for, bi families and families with trans parents who
100%.
could have, an
Yeah.
oops, but in general, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're
Um,
right that they do. They
yeah,
also count and
sure.
count a lot. But
But
yeah.
yeah, but by and large, yeah. And just the community and the resources available today is amazing. Your podcast, for example, all of the books and, a growing number of TV shows even that show, different types of families.
Yeah.
It's heartening, although, I think there's still a ways to go.
It, it's just what I love is when I can see our families just being normal, that it isn't the focus, right?
Mm.
We happen to be watching a movie about dolphins and there happens to be a gay family at the dolphin park or whatever. I mean, I can't even think of something off the top of my head, but it isn't the plot of whatever we're
Right.
watching or reading, right? I think that that's where we need to get to. And this actually is hopefully a nice segue into discussing your blog and Mombian. So many of the resources that are out there that do depict queer people, uh, do depict queer families, let me say
Mm.
instead, use animals to do it instead of
Mhm.
Yeah.
humans.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
Mm.
what?
Yes. So,
Yeah.
Why is
yes.
that?
Why is that?
Why is that?
So well, I think early on it was certainly a protective measure. And,
Sure.
one book that I have in mind is called Uncle Bobby's Wedding. And it's about a little girl guinea pig who's upset about her uncle getting married to his boyfriend, not because it's a same-sex couple, but because, she's afraid he won't have time for her anymore.
Right.
It's an adorable story. It was first published, I think, in 2008. And people were upset about it. It's become one of the most challenged books.
Yeah.
Because it's about guinea pigs?
Yeah,
But
of course, that's got to be why.
rodents, But the author republished it just a few years ago with a new illustrator showing people because times had changed.
Wow.
I think she originally drew guinea pigs who are adorable. It's the cutest book, but she drew it that way because she thought it would be a way to kind of soften the message that she still wanted to get across. But then, a few years ago, she was like, times have changed, but it's still a good story. Let's reissue it with the people.
Yeah.
And that's great. And as I think I've mentioned to you before, Sam, there's a real need for picture books showing kids with LGBTQ parents having second and third and fourth kids, kids
Yes.
getting siblings. And there are
Yes.
so few of those. And I think the majority of them are these strange animal analogies where it's, a pet coming into the family, or it's the family dog being upset about the new baby, and it's not a
Right.
matter of two human siblings.
Mm-hmm.
There've been a couple of stories in like the past 6 months or so that I think are trying to address this and show more human representation. But for the longest time, it was just animals.
Yeah.
And I think part of it may not be because of any evil intent, but just it's so hard to show all the different kinds of family representation that if you show
Yeah.
animals, it might feel like it's more applicable to a wide variety of families,
Yeah.
but at the same time, there's real value in seeing humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hold on for just a moment. We'll be right back. You know about babyREADY because you're listening to this podcast, so you know that we are all about queer family planning and helping you have the family of your dreams. But did you know that we don't abandon you once your baby arrives? We actually offer parenting coaching as well, and that's not just for the newborn phase, although we are there for that, but it's through toddlerhood and young children, tweens, and even through the teen years. When you need someone unbiased to lend an ear so that they can hear where your struggles truly are and help you come up with a path and a plan that feels truly right for you and your individual family, don't hesitate to reach out. We are always happy to be there for you. Visit us at www.babyready.info for more information. But it's very true, and you're right. I mean, I can think of lots of books. I mean, I think of Tom Tracy's series, the Scoochie and Skittles series about Scoochie, but it's Skittles is her cousin. It's not her sibling, even though Tom has two daughters, and it would be nice to see him expand. Maybe that's what we need to do. Tom, make sure that you write another book about how Scoochie feels about becoming a big sister. But one of the things that I do like about Tom's books and the Scoochie and Skittles series is one, that they're humans, but again, they're not stories about having gay dads. They're about learning how to navigate my emotions around roller skating or something like that. And it's just perseverance and things like that. So I do love that the premise is really not the focus of being a queer family.
Yeah, I'd love to say more about that, but maybe I should just circle back and talk a little bit about the blog and how I've come into looking at so much LGBTQ children's literature. So when our son was about 2, I'd been staying home with him, as Helen described, but I was still looking to kind of keep my professional skills fresh. And I was like, hey, this blogging thing might have something to commend it. And I thought about the different kinds of blogs I could do. I love to cook and I love to bake, and doing a cooking blog could have been on the radar, but doing that in addition to being a full-time mom would have made my head explode.
Sure.
So doing a blog that was about parenting, where my kind of research for the blog was just like going through my day as a parent, made a whole lot more sense.
Sure.
At the same time, I didn't want the blog to be just what my kid and I did all day, because again, I want to protect his privacy, and our lives just weren't that interesting. We're kind of middle class white people, and it's just not that interesting. No one really cares what my kid had for breakfast. So I realized there were no sites that were really talking about queer news and resources and information with parental lens. There were queer sites that weren't typically talking about parenting. There were parenting sites that weren't typically talking about queer people, except for, maybe that one article in June that they would put up. Right. So I said, hey, let's see what we can do. And so I launched Mombian as a site of news and information and, occasional observations about the state of LGBTQ parenting life. And it took off. I've had the honor of winning 2 GLAAD Media Awards over the years, which is very humbling. And while I've covered a whole range of topics, from politics and legal issues to kind of everyday situations, I'd also always reviewed the LGBTQ inclusive kids books that existed. Now, when I started the blog in 2005, and for 10 or 12 years after that, I could count the number in a year on one hand. And so that was easy to do. And then in 2017, I think post-marriage equality and that couple of years cycle in the publishing industry, everything took off. So to organize all of that, I launched a database of LGBTQ kids books, which you can find a link to on my site. And I put all my book reviews in there. It's searchable, it's filterable by topics and identities, and I try to include every LGBTQ inclusive kids book for ages 0 to 12, plus ones for LGBTQ parents. I don't do young adult because then I would never sleep. And also, I think
Right.
young adults are pretty much, sourcing their own books. My
Sure.
site is really a site for parents, and so knowing that literature for the 0 to 12 age range is more important for parents. And then once their kids get a little older, I think it's less relevant to parents. Of course, there are some parents who are now, taking a case to the Supreme Court because they want to be able to assess what their kids are reading in school. But
Yeah.
that's another story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have this database and I've read a lot of the literature. I think there's definitely been a shift over the years from the books that were about having same-sex parents or about different types of families to stories that just happen to have queer
Mhm.
families in them. And that's been great. I think ultimately we need some of each.
Yes.
I think especially for, you know, trans kids, non-binary kids who want stories that help them understand what they may be feeling
Hmm.
about their
Hmm.
gender. Sometimes having a book that's a little more specifically geared towards these topics is useful. But at the same time, just put a trans kid in an adventure book.
Yes. Yes.
Let them have an adventure.
Yes.
So, and we're seeing some like that now, which is wonderful.
Yes.
Um, but it's definitely a shift, and there's definitely some that come off as just a little too pedagogic in a way that's kind of been done, and we don't really need more of,
Yes,
So.
exactly. Exactly. But that's, I mean, I have to say your site has been a resource I've utilized pretty much since its inception because I was in the birth work world and connecting parents with resources always. So as soon as I came across it, it was another one that was, flagged for me to remember to be able to. But I reached out to you on more than one occasion and said, "Do you have a book? Can you think of a book that meets this criteria? Because I'm struggling." And I love that you've got a database that people can search by a variety of different means of how they want to filter things so that they can find what it is they're looking for. It is absolutely necessary. We want to be able to fill our children's bookshelves with some stories, not all necessarily. I mean, I read lots of different books with lots of different types. I might read a crime novel. I'm nowhere near a police detective in any way, but it still appealed to me because the story is engaging. And so we want to be able to have, but I want to see some representation of myself reflected. And kids, I feel like they need that more than anyone. Parents were like, well, somewhere somehow will be reflected, but kids are like, I kind of want this book to be a mirror. That's why we see people writing books with, you know order your book today and we'll insert your child's name and interest into this book and we'll send it back to you. They want that mirror. And I think that having access to a list where they can find these resources is really a critical part of parenting small children as queer parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And the database now has over 1,700 items in it.
Wow.
So, again, some of them are for parents, parenting guides for LGBTQ parents, things like that. But the vast majority are picture books, followed by the middle grade. And so there's a lot out there. There's a handful that always get shown on the book challenge lists and things
Yeah.
like that. But I guess almost thankfully, there's a whole bunch that fly under the radar of those.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I hope that people do seek them out. And it is so hard because the cataloging information and the publisher blurbs don't always say what the representation is.
Right.
So, I'm not even sure I have everyone
Sure.
that's out there, but I try to fill in when I can. So.
Yeah. And do people send you recommendations? Oh, I read this book. I didn't see it on your list. You should check it out. Or do you usually get in there before other people even have a chance to see it?
I'd say most of the time these days I get in there first because I really do lurk on all of the publisher lists and things like that. You know, I have some sources for that. But once in a while someone will share something that I have missed, certainly. And you know, there's also some self-published ones that I don't necessarily pick up on. I have to say, self-published ones range widely in quality.
Sure.
There are some good ones, and I'm happy to include good ones. But there are also some that, you know, that feel very much like the books that were being published 20 years ago about our families, kind of very pedantic, pedagogic takes. I'm like, that's not really where we're at. So,
Yeah. And are most of the books North American, or do you have a selection from around the world, or?
I'm sticking with North America again, only because I need to sleep.
Sure,
Mostly US and Canada. I have a few from the UK, and sometimes things are published both in the UK and the US simultaneously or close together. I know there's some that are still just in the UK as of now that I haven't reviewed. And again, it's just, I have to draw limits, and, you know, as my time allows, I'll fill those in. But yeah, but some of my favorites are indeed from Canada. Orca Press is a great publisher in Canada that has consistently put out some really inclusive books. And I think my favorite one for new families recently is an Orca title called We're Happy You're Here.
Oh, I love that one.
And it's so nice because it's just, there's not even a storyline per se. It's just kind of images of families diverse in all kinds of ways, showing how they prepared for having their kid. And it's, you know, families who were formed with adoption and surrogacy and assisted reproduction and all these things, but it's celebrating them, but also the medical and legal and social work professionals who help them to really show, you know, the village that it takes.
And it does. And it does, right? For sure it does. That is actually, I will make sure that for listeners, I do make sure I put in the show notes access to the Mombian website, so that you can find all of the wonderful gems that Dana's talking about. You mentioned books for parents. Are they parenting style books? Are they family creation types of books? Like, I'm thinking of some of like Queer Conceptions or something. Or is it about how to create a family, or is it your family's here now, how do you parent these children?
What do you do with them?
What do you do?
That's right.
Well, the answer is both.
Okay.
I think for a long time, the focus for LGBTQ specific parenting guides was on the creation part of it. But there are, I think, an increasing number now that are kind of talking about raising the family, just living life as an LGBTQ family these days. And I even put in guides that are meant for a general audience, but that have information specific to LGBTQ families.
Okay. Excellent.
So I think that's useful, especially for the ones that do it well. You know, sometimes we're kind of squeezed into a very special chapter. Other times we're included throughout the book. There's this one I just reviewed called First Love, and it's an advice guide for parents whose kids are starting to have crushes and date. And it's meant for any kind of parents of any kind of kids.
Well, that's a great idea.
And the
we all have questions of how to talk to your kid about it, right?
And the examples are of queer kids and non-queer kids throughout the book. There is a special chapter on some queer specific issues, but those aren't the only times when the queer kids are being used as examples. Sometimes they're used as just an example of, here's a healthy relationship. You know? And so that's great.
That's cute.
That's, you know, that was really heartening to see. And I also include memoirs. There's a whole bunch of memoirs of queer parenting by queer parents. So that's another part of the kind of grown-up section for the database.
But I love that, because again, we do like to see ourselves represented. So sometimes the idea of being able to read a memoir of somebody who's been there and done that, especially if you're in the trenches and your children are smaller and you're thinking some days, what did I sign myself up for with these
Yes.
children?
And I think, ultimately the similarities across any kind of parent are far greater than the differences.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. I love that the idea of the first love, though. I'm definitely going to go and check that out, even though all three of my children are beyond
Well
the
beyond
first
that.
love, but
Yeah.
it's a neat concept. I would have to think that when you see a book that is done well, you just have the most magical job to be able to read it and review it and put that information out there for people to have access to. I mean, there's always going to be someone who doesn't do the job as well, their message isn't as well conveyed, but when you find a true gem, it's got to be truly rewarding to go, oh, good, I get to send this out so everybody gets to learn about it.
Very much so. Very much so. Um, yeah, there are definitely books I get more excited about than others. I think there are many I'm excited about because it's just more representation, and that's great.
Sure. Yeah,
But yeah, the true gems are really wonderful.
that's pretty cool. I promised you I wouldn't keep you all afternoon. Just so listeners know, Dana and Helen are in Massachusetts and they're fans of the Boston Fleet.
Oh, yes.
Which so we've aside our differences as I am a Toronto Scepters fan, so that we could come together and have this conversation today. And I just want to say that what I have loved, especially over the last year or so, is that while I can reach out to you and talk to you about books and ask you questions about books, it's also been fun to reach out and touch base with you about hockey and women's hockey.
Yes, I do try to keep tabs on all the queer parents in the PWHL.
Right? And they're growing. I love that Rattray and her wife are expecting a baby. And yes, yeah.
I didn't know
Yeah.
this. She knows this stuff. I don't always get caught up on it. Oh, it's great. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Awesome.
There is a hockey player, and I won't name names because I didn't ask for permission to do that, but there is a hockey player who plays for the PWHL who's not a Toronto Scepter, unfortunately for us, who took prenatal classes with me when she and her wife were
nice.
expecting their first baby, which is kind of how I think I first got connected to the whole idea of the PWHL. So I may have more than one favorite team, but I have to just say.
Wow.
In any case, I needed to throw that in there because that was a point for listeners, a point of entertainment for the three of us as we were
Sure.
preparing to have this conversation today.
And I have to say, women's sports is one of the things that's giving me life right now.
100%.
There's so much that's wrong with the world, but I think the rise of women's sports and just the attention and the awareness about it in the
Sure.
past year or two has been
It's
phenomenal.
all from the WNBA and Caitlin Clark,
Yes,
and it's
yes.
honestly been 25 more years.
1997, we were at the first WNBA game when we were living in Manhattan.
In
We
Manhattan.
went to the first
Wow.
Liberty game,
Yeah,
and
but
we've
it
been
took a
fans ever
generation,
since.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
These things take a generation,
They
you
sure
know,
do.
and
Yeah.
I think sometimes, I mean, I'm again astounded how much progress we've made in our lifetime. But I think in some cases, if it goes a little too fast,
Yeah.
there's a backlash to it that happens
Sure.
ultimately. I think
Sure.
it just takes a long time for society
Yeah.
to kind of wrap their head around some of these issues, especially if they don't know individuals, gay
Yeah.
people or trans
Yeah.
people or women's sports athletes.
It's true. It's very
It
true.
just takes a long time.
Yeah.
So, but I'm thrilled with the women's leagues these days. Oh,
Yeah.
we got a rugby team coming to town.
Yeah.
Oh, do
There's
you?
soccer. Yeah, we
Yeah.
have rugby.
Yep.
There's 6 teams at the LUS or some Canada.
I think the rugby league is US for now.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're gonna have an NWSL soccer franchise in our area
Love it.
pretty soon. Yeah, I think the WNBA had more of a learning curve because they started earlier in terms
Right.
of queer inclusion. But just out of the gates, the hockey league, the PWHL has been completely even-handed in terms of how it promotes and supports and everything
Yeah.
else.
All their athletes.
All the
Yeah.
athletes.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
that's
but they
tremendous.
had the WNBA having, paved the road for
Yeah,
30
Sure.
years.
absolutely.
For sure.
And
Absolutely.
we're all leveraging that work that's been happening.
Sure.
So
Oh, yeah.
and we can go back to Billie Jean King and
Right,
and all
right. That
the
inaugural
the
game
great ancients. Yes.
dropped the puck for the first
Yeah.
ever PWHL game.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's truly amazing to watch the sports grow and evolve. And we've got Tempo coming to Toronto in 2026, so the WNBA franchise coming to Toronto next
Oh,
year.
okay.
Yep. And
Nice.
and we're holding out for a professional baseball league. My wife used to
Oh.
play high level baseball, so that's where she's hoping that we get to go next.
Well, I think we should have a curling league.
There
See,
you
that's
go.
that's more my speed. I could do that.
So maybe we should move to Canada.
I
Throw a
know.
few rocks. There you go.
Yeah.
There
I
you
like me
go.
some good maple syrup and a beer and some
Right?
curling. I think actually my family heritage is Canadian, French
Oh, is it?
Canadian. Yeah.
Oh, French Canadian. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
My
Yeah.
last name is Maynard, which is an Americanization, Menard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, and truthfully, get in the car. It's not that far to get up here.
Yeah.
Really, I only live 45 minutes from Buffalo, so come on up. You're welcome anytime.
It's what we're in retirement, right? It's
Yeah.
one of our thoughts is to go around and see a PWHL game at all the home stadiums.
There you go. Well,
I think
absolutely let me know if you come to Toronto.
that'd be fun. It's not going to happen this year, but maybe next.
Yeah.
I think we should do
Good.
that.
There you
Be
go.
fun.
There you go. All right, I will let you go, but before I let you go, would you please tell me what is your very, very favorite part of parenting?
Oh, you've asked the tough questions.
I try.
Don't we go?
If you've got something, you go. And
Well, I would just say, to me, the greatest thing about being a parent, or what I've learned the most about it. So when I was a parent, or before I was a parent, I thought it would be great because when that kid is 6 years old, I will have all the answers in the universe. I will know why the sky is blue and why the grass is green, and I can explain everything. I thought that'd be marvelous. Yeah. No. But out of the gates, I didn't really know what happened between age 0 and 5. It was kind of a black hole there.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
the day he was born, and like each week, as you could see his world evolve, and he would pick up on things. And the day that he discovered that those wiggly things down there were actually attached to him, they were his feet. They were part of him, and his whole world just changes, and you can see that happening inside. So I have been astounded at how wonderful it's been every week, every month, every year, his development, and just seeing the whole process. It's been much better than I could have ever guessed.
Sure.
Much more meaningful to me.
Yeah.
That's which is kind of a lame answer probably.
No, but it's so true. Yeah.
That's totally where I'm at.
Yeah.
No, I think, I mean, just having this other being that you get to watch, learn, and grow, as Helen said, is amazing and remarkable, and I think has taught me so much about myself. And I'd like to think I've taught him things as well, but it's certainly a two-way process.
Sure.
And and now he's just an amazing young man, and just I think still just a person I like to be with.
Yeah.
And that's
it's just great. Yeah, it's wonderful.
That's amazing.
It's also really fun for me. I think it's been great that it's not my biological child. Our son looks exactly like Dana. The red curly hair, right?
Yes.
Which not me. So people looking like, what?
What's the connection here?
When I tried to explain to people that yes, I gave birth to him, they're like, nah, you're kidding me. You're the
That's
nanny
awesome.
or the something. But I just love that he's so different than me. If my child had looked so much like me, I think I would have been meaner to them, like it made them into like little mini me's, like, why aren't you doing this? I would have done this, da 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 da. But he's just been his own little flower, growing in his own way. And it's just been so interesting. It's so wonderful. He's a great kid. Love it to pieces.
Yeah, yeah.
It is fun kind of bursting people's assumptions with the whole reciprocal IVF thing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I've heard that from a number of people who have done reciprocal IVF and then obviously not been the birthing parent, but whose child looks like a carbon copy of the egg. So it's like, how did I saw her pregnant? How did that come from her body? It's awesome.
But I actually really appreciated what you just said because I've heard from so many parents who weren't genetically connected with their kids and wondering if they would have a bond with them or
Right.
what their relationship was going to be like. And I love that you're like finding something like genuinely like actively positive about
Oh, I doubled down on it. Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
So
and I think what I find from most people is once the baby has arrived and your heart is as full to bursting as it could possibly be, you realize genes are genes for a lot of the non-biologically connected parents that I speak to. They just say, I just love this child with everything I have. I don't know that genes necessarily would have made it any different. And I mean, obviously they don't know, but I love to hear that because it's often a worry during pregnancy that I hear people bring up. Will I love this child as much if it's not genetically my child? And I love to hear that really and truly the heart fills either way.
Oh yeah. I mean, just go
Yeah.
talk to any adoptive parents.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
and I think he's certainly his own person, but I also see things in him that are very much you or me.
Yeah.
He's got a little of each of us.
I've trained him well in my ways. Yes.
I fully get it.
But his food tastes are more similar to mine. I think.
Yeah.
And that
That's
may be
true.
because of
Oh, it's totally true.
genetic
Yeah.
connections. So
Yeah. They like sour. I like bitter. She doesn't drink my beer. I'm an IPA person. She's a dark beer person. My beer is safe.
it works
There you
out.
go. Excellent.
Perfect.
And that's how we've lasted for more than 30 years.
Oh, exactly. My stepdaughter has many similar, and we always joke because she's my stepdaughter. I've got no genetic connection to her, but she's got my taste in a few of the foods. She's got my shoe size. She gets certain things from me, and people are like, I don't understand how that happened. Like, never mind.
And I think that's, the other thing about just parenting with a partner for those who do is that it really is a partnership and each person contributes different things in different ways and develops a different relationship. And I think, for straight couples, that's almost expected when you think about different gender roles.
Yeah.
Yes.
And even though, what we contribute isn't split down the traditional gender lines, we still have our own areas of
when he has questions about some things, he goes to Dana, and
Yeah.
he has questions other things, it comes to me. Yeah.
That makes
Sure.
sense. That makes perfect sense. Thank you both so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Oh, it's been delightful.
It's been fantastic. Thanks. As a queer individual with colonial lineage, I want to first acknowledge the land upon which I live and work. Being from what is now known as Burlington, Ontario, I recognize the original ancestry of these lands as they span from Lake Ontario to the Niagara Escarpment and beyond. These lands are steeped in Indigenous history that benefits my community every day. The territory is mutually covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I stand is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. The land dictates everything about our ways of being. Particularly, the land teaches us about fluidity. Concepts of the binary system and heteropatriarchy were imposed by the colonials who were, at the same time, removing children from their homes, families, and all that was familiar to them. These same children were divided by the only two prescribed binaries recognized by the settlers, and they were forced to conform to a performative, gendered falsehood. The land doesn't operate under binary thinking. It is diverse, complex, and unpredictable at times. Rather, the land holds us and all of our remarkable paths and identities. Every organism and spirit has a purpose. It is from this understanding that I strive to live and grow. Thank you for joining me today on the Becoming Baby Ready podcast. If you have a story that you'd like to share, or you know someone who might, if you're a professional who works in the capacity of helping people start and grow their families, and you identify as being a part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community yourself, then please don't hesitate to reach out. We always have room for more stories to share, and there's always more learning to do.